they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me.
Donald Trump's frustration was on full display following his tense exchange with Volodymyr Zelensky. But things took a wild turn when Barack Obama's name was thrown into the mix, setting Trump off in a full-blown meltdown. Was this just another diplomatic debate, or was Trump losing control over the narrative? And what exactly did Obama say that sent him spiraling? Let's break it all down. The explosive Trump-Zelensky meeting. Things got wild in the White House this week. On February 28, 2025, the world basically watched Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky go head-to-head in what can only be described as a spectacularly tense showdown that involved everything from Trump claiming the USA gave $350 billion to Ukraine to Obama giving sheets to Ukraine. And honestly, nobody's that surprised. Let's rewind. Trump's been side-eyeing US aid to Ukraine ever since Russia invaded back in 2022. Trump argues that the US has poured billions into supporting Ukraine without any results. He has been vocal about his skepticism regarding this aid and had hinted, without much detail, that he'd swiftly end the war upon taking office. And earlier, on February 12th, Trump had a conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, seemingly initiating peace talks without Ukraine's involvement. Understandably, this decision ruffled feathers in Kyiv and across European capitals. In response, Zelensky and European allies urged Trump to provide security guarantees for any potential truce, emphasizing the need for consequences if either side reneged. However, Trump remained non-committal and doubled down by saying that Putin respects him enough to not break any deal. It is also no hidden secret that there have been tensions between Trump and Zelensky, which probably started back in 2019. That's when Trump, who later got impeached, unsuccessfully tried to pressure Zelensky into investigating Hunter Biden, the son of his future successor. That's why Zelensky had to get help from French President Emmanuel Macron just to score a meeting with the American president. This past week, the talks were especially tense, centered around a deal to mine Ukraine's minerals. Trump wanted the mining rights to settle a fictional $500 billion debt, while Zelensky was after security guarantees as part of the deal. Despite all this, there was a glimmer of hope that things between them might be starting to thaw, but nothing happened as planned. On February 28th, Zelensky flew to DC, hoping to salvage, well, something. The two leaders were supposedly hashing out a deal for the US to access Ukraine's rare mineral resources, a move Kyiv and Europe thought might finally thaw relations. The meeting started tense and spiraled fast. Trump, per usual, refused to budge on security guarantees, while Zelensky wasn't thrilled about peace talks that treated Ukraine like a bystander in its own war. Things got heated, voices rose, and by the end, let's just say Zelensky didn't exactly get a deal or even a farewell handshake. In fact, Zelensky was told to leave the White House. I repeat, he was told to leave the White House. But Zelensky being told to leave the White House isn't big news at all. What happened in that meeting is the real deal. It was shocking, stunning, and something so absurd that no one saw it coming. The meeting started with Trump appreciating Zelensky for asking the United States to help, and how the Biden administration didn't do anything when the war broke out. However, the discussion turned heated when Vice President J.D. Vance made a comment about what makes America a great country.
What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
President Zelensky, clearly frustrated, jumped in to remind everyone of the situation in Ukraine. He pointed out that Putin had occupied large parts of Ukraine back in 2014, and no one had stopped him, Zelensky said.
Those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people, you know?
Zelensky didn't hold back, making it clear that the world had failed to stop Putin's aggression for years. He pointed to the 2019 deal he signed with Putin, Macron, and Merkel, arguing that diplomacy had been tried and failed. Then, shifting his focus to Vice President J.D. Vance, Zelensky fired off a question that left the room tense.
What kind of diplomacy, J.D., you are speaking about? What do you mean?
This is where things really started to escalate. Vance got defensive and fired back.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Zelensky, not backing down, asked Vance if he had even been to Ukraine. Vance replied that he had actually watched and seen the stories, and he knows what happens. He accused Ukraine of bringing people on a propaganda tour. At this point, President Trump stepped in, telling Zelensky that his country was in a very bad position. He accused Zelensky of letting Ukraine fall into such a dire state and not having the leverage to fix it. Trump then said that Ukraine doesn't have any cards to play with, but Ukraine can start having cards to play with once the United States steps in. Zelensky, clearly feeling the weight of the situation, responded, "I do not have cards. I am the president in a war." Trump, being Trump, didn't let up though. He shot back and said something that shocked the world.
You're playing
Serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
What do you think
You're
about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
That was a wild, wild accusation, but that's just the start. Things got even more tense as Vance turned to Zelensky and basically called him out for not showing any gratitude during the entire meeting. Vance pointed out that Zelensky had campaigned for Trump's opposition in Pennsylvania a few months back and pressed him to show some appreciation for the US and for President Trump, who was, in his view, trying to save Ukraine. Zelensky, clearly frustrated, started to respond, suggesting that just talking loudly about the war wasn't going to solve anything, but Trump quickly jumped in, cutting him off and bluntly stating that Ukraine was in serious trouble. When Zelensky tried to speak again, Trump shut him down, saying he'd already done enough talking and emphasizing that Ukraine wasn't winning the conflict. However, Trump also made it clear that Ukraine had a real chance of pulling through, thanks to American support. Zelensky, staying calm but firm, acknowledged the gravity of the situation and reminded everyone that Ukraine had been standing strong and fighting alone since the war began. He also clarified that he had expressed gratitude, just not publicly, only within the cabinet meeting. Now, when Zelensky said that Ukraine had been fighting the war alone, this seemed to have triggered Trump. He quickly fired back by saying something that you would expect from Trump.
You haven't been
In this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank-
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment.
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Trump then threatened Zelensky by saying that it would be difficult to do business like this. Zelensky tried to defuse the situation by thanking the American people and government, but Trump kept focusing on the point that Ukraine doesn't stand a chance without the United States' help. Things got pretty heated again, as Trump pointed out that Ukraine was running low on soldiers and pushed for a ceasefire, arguing it would be a smart move to stop the fighting and save lives. Zelensky agreed that Ukraine wanted to end the war, but stressed that any ceasefire would need solid guarantees to work. Trump wasn't having it though, insisting that a ceasefire could happen way faster than a full agreement, and seemed annoyed that Zelensky wasn't fully on board. This is where Zelensky tried to explain that the Ukrainian people's opinion on a ceasefire mattered, but Trump cut him off, bringing up how past US administrations had handled things. He compared Obama's support, sending basic supplies like sheets, to his own. Trump claims that he sent javelins, the advanced weapons Ukraine used to take out tanks. Trump made it clear he thought Ukraine should be more thankful, especially since, in his view, they didn't have much leverage without US backing. He kept driving the point home. With America, Ukraine had a chance, but without it, they were in a tough spot. Afterwards, Trump gave a very clear warning to the Ukrainian president.
But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out.
Well, this coming from Trump wasn't exactly surprising, given how vocal and consistent he's been about the United States' stance on providing security guarantees to Ukraine. He's made it clear time and again that he doesn't see the US as the primary player in this situation. In fact, he's openly stated, "I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that." This statement sums up his position pretty neatly. He believes Europe should take the lead in supporting Ukraine rather than the US stepping in as the main guarantor of security. It's a stance that sparked a lot of debate, especially given the high stakes of the conflict and Ukraine's reliance on international support. For Trump, it's about shifting the responsibility to Europe, but for others, it raises questions about America's role in global stability. By the way, Trump has been very clear about his stance on Ukraine joining NATO. When asked about it, he said, "NATO, you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started." The sudden and unexpected dismissal of President Volodymyr Zelensky from the White House sent shocks around the world. wild, catching everyone off guard and marking a major escalation in already tense diplomatic relations. It was one of those moments that made people stop and say, wait, what just happened? The move didn't just bring the discussions to a screeching halt. It also sparked a whirlwind of reactions from all corners of the globe. Leaders, analysts, and everyday folks alike were left scrambling to make sense of the situation, with some calling it a diplomatic misstep and others seeing it as a deliberate power play. Trump faces fierce backlash. Ever since Russia stepped into Ukraine in February 2022, the Democrats have been all in on supporting Ukraine's right to defend itself and remain sovereign. Under President Joe Biden, the US made a pledge to help Ukraine out for as long as it takes, pouring billions into military and economic support. In just 2022, Congress pushed through a whopping $112 billion in aid, and they didn't stop there. By April 2024, they passed another $95 billion to help not just Ukraine, but also Israel and Taiwan. So it came as no surprise that Democrats defended Zelensky and slammed the US president for publicly berating the Ukrainian president. The fallout from the disastrous Oval Office meeting between Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky continued to ripple through US politics, with Democrats stepping up to defend Zelensky after what many called a shameful and humiliating encounter. Democratic lawmakers were quick to voice their support for Zelensky, emphasizing his role as a leader fighting to defend democracy on the front lines. Chris Coons, a Democratic senator from Delaware, took to X to express his outrage, writing, "We owe him our thanks for leading a nation fighting on the front lines of democracy, not the public berating he received at the White House." Other Democratic lawmakers didn't hold back in their condemnation of Trump's behavior. Adam Schiff, the California senator, set the tone with a biting statement, saying, "A hero and a coward are meeting in the Oval Office today, and when the meeting is over, the hero will return home to Ukraine." His words captured the stark contrast between Zelensky, who has been leading his nation through a brutal war, and Trump, whose handling of the meeting was widely seen as disrespectful and counterproductive. Chris Murphy, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, echoed the sentiment, calling the entire episode an utter embarrassment for America. His comment summed up the frustration and disappointment felt by many who saw the meeting as a missed opportunity to show solidarity with a key ally. Ruben Gallego, the Arizona senator, was even more blunt, simply stating, "This is a disgrace." Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland didn't hold back in his criticism of the Oval Office meeting, calling the scenes that unfolded beyond disgraceful. His words captured the sense of outrage felt by many who saw the treatment of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as not just disrespectful, but deeply damaging to the US-Ukraine relationship. Van Hollen's condemnation was echoed by his colleague Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who went even further, stating plainly that the people of Ukraine and President Zelensky deserve an apology. Durbin didn't stop there. He took direct aim at Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, accusing them of berating Zelensky, putting on a show of lies and misinformation that would make Putin blush. His sharp words painted a picture of a meeting that had gone completely off the rails, with Trump and Vance's behavior not only embarrassing the United States, but also betraying one of its closest allies. Durbin's remark that they're popping champagne in the Kremlin drove home the point that the fallout from the meeting wasn't just a domestic issue, it had global implications. Tina Smith, a Democratic senator from Minnesota, didn't hold back in her criticism, calling on her Republican colleagues to step up and speak out in the name of patriotism. She drew a sharp contrast between America's past and its present, saying, "Once we fought tyrants. Today, Trump and Vance are bending America's knee." Her words were a direct challenge to Republicans, urging them to stand up for the values the US has historically defended, rather than staying silent as Trump and Vance appeared to undermine a key ally in Ukraine. The Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, was equally blunt, accusing Trump and Vance of doing Putin's dirty work. His statement cut straight to the heart of the issue, suggesting that the two were not just failing to support Ukraine, but actively aiding Russia's interests. Similarly, Sheldon Whitehouse, the Democratic senator from Rhode Island, took the criticism a step further, accusing Trump and Vance of acting like ventriloquist dummies for Putin. You see, these Democratic senators have made a valid point, especially since the Russians have been pretty much celebrating how the meeting turned out. Russian officials jumped in to comment on the heated back and forth between President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump at the White House, calling the whole thing historic and even labeling it a livid reprimand from the Oval Office. They didn't hold back, making it obvious they saw the clash as a big win for Russia. To them, the public tension between Trump and Zelensky was like a gift, showing cracks in the US-Ukraine alliance, and they weren't shy about rubbing it in either. The fact that Russia is gloating over this whole mess just adds to the worry that the meeting didn't just strain US-Ukraine ties, it also handed Russia a PR win and made an already tricky situation even messier. Similarly, many of Ukraine's European allies have been been quick to criticize Trump, accusing him of not being ready for peace with Russia. The shocking altercation in the Oval Office on Friday, which saw Zelensky leave the White House without signing an expected mineral deal, left European leaders stunned and rushing to his defense. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk was among the first to offer support, assuring Zelensky, "You are not alone." British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also stepped in, vowing unwavering support for Ukraine. The incident has sparked a broader conversation about Europe's role in supporting Ukraine and ensuring its security. Soon, representatives from more than a dozen European countries are set to meet in London to discuss ways to strengthen support for securing a just and enduring peace in Ukraine. Most importantly, the gathering will also focus on boosting defense cooperation among European nations, as concerns grow over whether the United States will continue to stand by NATO and its allies. French President Emmanuel Macron has signaled his willingness to open the discussion on the possibility of a European nuclear deterrent, following a request from Germany's next leader, Friedrich Merz. Merz has emphasized the urgent need for Europe to achieve independence from the United States on defense matters, reflecting a growing sentiment that Europe must take more responsibility for its own security. Adding to the chorus of support, European Union chiefs Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa reassured Zelensky that he was never alone. In a joint statement on social media, the European Commission and Council presidents wrote, "Be strong, be brave, be fearless," and pledged to continue working with Ukraine for a just and lasting peace. Oh, by the way, the bloc's top diplomat Kaja Kallas went even further, questioning the United States' leadership. She asked, "Today it became clear that the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us, Europeans, to take this challenge." It's no surprise that European countries are quickly stepping up to support Ukraine, especially with all the concerns about Trump's cozy relationship with Putin. There's a real fear that Trump might downplay America's role as a global leader in the Russia-Ukraine war and end up being outplayed by Putin. After all, Trump himself has called Putin highly respected, which doesn't exactly ease those worries. But the recent meeting between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky isn't something to brush off as no big deal. What happened there could seriously shake up global power dynamics and threaten the fragile peace the world is trying to hold on to. And for now, it could have a domino effect on disrupting everything. The consequences. The recent meeting on February 28, 2025, between former US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has caused major international concern. What was supposed to be a traditional discussion about stopping the fighting and setting up security agreements quickly turned into a heated and public disagreement filled with tension and strong demands. Many now believe that it was a deliberate humiliation of the Ukrainian president. This might be true or a complete coincidence, given we all know the personality of Donald Trump. But one thing can be said with certainty, that the aftermath of this meeting is not looking positive. You see, analysts believe that this meeting has weakened Ukraine's position globally, given Russia an advantage, disrupted Western alliances, and created risky new precedents for world security. A critical issue arising from the meeting is the possible stop of US military help to Ukraine. For a long time, American weapons, from Javelin missiles to artillery shells, have been vital for Ukrainian forces fighting against a larger, better-equipped Russian military. However, Trump's lack of support for Zelensky during the meeting, along with his comments that Europe should take on more responsibility for helping Ukraine, has led to fears that the US might cut back or stop these weapon supplies. According to Michael Kaufman, a military analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Ukraine has enough weapons to keep fighting at its current pace until the summer. However, without the United States' help, Ukraine would be short of ammunition and unable to use some of its most sophisticated weaponry. By the way, it is worth understanding that this isn't just about bullets, it's about air defense systems, drones, and intelligence sharing that keep Kyiv standing. Case in point are the stats that I am going to share with you. Since Russia first invaded Ukraine in 2014, the US has provided extensive military support, totaling around $69.2 billion. This support ramped up significantly after the full-scale invasion in February 2022, with the US providing an additional $65.9 billion in aid, using the Emergency Presidential Drawdown Authority. The US has tapped into DoD stockpiles 55 times since August 2021, supplying Ukraine with approximately $27,688 billion worth of military assistance. This aid includes a vast array of weaponry, advanced air defense systems like Patriot batteries, NASAMS, and Hawk systems, along with thousands of anti-aircraft missiles such as Stingers and AIMS. The US has also supplied Ukraine with over 40 HIMARS systems, hundreds of howitzers, millions of artillery rounds, and numerous tanks and armored vehicles like Abrams and Bradleys. In addition to ground and air support, The assistance covers anti-armor systems, small arms, maritime defenses, and various surveillance and communication technologies, ensuring Ukraine is equipped on multiple fronts. This comprehensive military aid underscores the critical role of US support in Ukraine's defense efforts against the ongoing Russian aggression. But that was the story of the past and could change very soon. Bad news for Ukraine is that there are rumors coming from the administration about possibly cutting back on the arms shipments to Ukraine that are still waiting to be sent. These shipments were approved by former President Joe Biden right before he left office, seemingly as a last-minute effort to lock in billions in extra aid before Trump stepped into the role. After a tense meeting at the White House, President Zelensky spoke to Fox News and admitted that it would be tough for Ukraine to stand up against the invading Russian forces without the support from the US. Still, he remained hopeful that the relationship between Kyiv and Washington could be repaired. He expressed a desire for Trump to show more support for Ukraine, really wishing Trump would take a stronger stand with them. Will Trump show support, especially given the fact that he has criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after returning to the office by saying he should have made a deal with Putin to avoid the conflict in the first place? That said, it is well understood by now that Ukraine really needs Trump's help to keep fighting, and losing it could be devastating. From the recent development, it won't be entirely wrong to assume that Trump wants Europe to take more responsibility and not put all the burden on the United States. Europe has said it'll do more, like providing more money and weapons, but there's real doubt about whether it can actually follow through. European countries are already stretched thin, and it would take years for them to ramp up production to US levels, time that Ukraine just doesn't have. Also, there's also a lot of talk in Ukraine about whether President Zelensky is still the right guy for the job. He was a big unifying force during the war, but now even some of his allies are starting to question his leadership. Critics argue that his tough stance, refusing to make any concessions to Russia or to back down from his total victory goal, has turned off important partners like Trump, leaving Ukraine more isolated. Some people think Zelensky won't last much longer because he's rubbed folks the wrong way, including both Trump and Putin, who'd rather have someone more agreeable in charge. Now, Ukraine can hope for two things. Trump changes his stance and starts to support Ukraine without asking any questions, just like the Democrats, or he actually puts an end to the war like he promised. And for now, the latest news is that after his meeting with Ukraine's president, Trump shared that his administration had very serious discussions with Russia concerning the ongoing war in Ukraine. He mentioned that he and Russian President Vladimir Putin might soon make a significant move to help end the prolonged conflict. Trump stated, "We will be speaking, and I think we'll perhaps do something that'll be significant. We want to end that war. That war would have not started if I was president." The critics of Trump argue that he is making just another false promise here, and they are kind of making sense here. Trump has repeatedly boasted on the campaign trail that he could end the Ukraine war quickly, sometimes even claiming he could do it in just 24 hours. But there's one thing he keeps conveniently forgetting. He was president when fighting in eastern Ukraine intensified between Kyiv's forces and Moscow-backed separatists, long before Putin sent in tens of thousands of troops in 2022. Trump also needs to understand that ending a war isn't as simple as making a deal between two leaders. Russia has deeply entrenched goals in Ukraine, and Ukraine isn't willing to just give up its territory. Any negotiation would require major compromises, and neither side has shown much willingness to back down. If Trump pushes for a peace deal, it might mean pressuring Ukraine into accepting terms that favor Russia, something that could be controversial both in Ukraine and among its Western allies. His relationship with Putin could play a role, but that role could also work against him. If he's seen as being too friendly with Russia, it might weaken US influence in Europe and make Ukraine and its allies uneasy. Plus, Congress, military leaders, and international partners all have a say in how the US handles Ukraine, so it's not entirely up to him. At the end of the day, it's easy to make big promises on the campaign trail. Whether Trump can actually deliver on this one, only time will tell. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, check out the suggested content on your screen by clicking one of the cards displayed.